Juventus is one of the richest and most powerful clubs in Italy, one of the biggest empires in professional football, and yet it has still ended up caught in a huge scandal. An investigation that left its numbers under suspicion. A club that had always projected total control, but in 2022 had to explain why its accounts did not match the reality of day-to-day operations. According to the investigation, the figures showed a level of wealth that simply did not show up in real life. On paper, it looked big, but in practice there was not as much as the document suggested. That started raising more questions than answers, and suddenly Juventus went from rolling Serie A with an iron fist to facing a sanction that left the club exposed in front of the entire world. And the hit was so big that for the first time in decades, the club did not inspire respect, it inspired doubts. A lot of them. This is the famous case of the capital gains that the press labeled false capital gains, the same case that cost them a 15-point deduction and a historic media backlash. And no, this is not a clickbait. This is exactly what I'm going to explain to you, because how can club seems broke when its accounts show massive profits? And how can you generate tens of millions without operations that actually justify those numbers? In the next few seconds, you are going to understand how the system works, why this looked legal, and how it eventually blew up in the most absurd way possible. Hola, ¿qué tal? I am Alberto, and I recommend to you to turn on subtitles because my English is terrible. Nothing here is invented. Everything you are about to hear is based on public documents and information verified by the press. I just connect the dots, as uncomfortable as they may be, and leave the thinking to you. Everything begins with something that, at first glance, looks normal, swapping players. But Juventus started doing it in a way that raised a lot of eyebrows, even though on paper it looked perfectly legal. Imagine this. You give me a mediocre player worth 20 millions. I give you another mediocre player worth 20 millions. And neither of us pays anything. Both clubs record a 20 million profit. And magically, the accounts look great. A profit that only exists in Excel, but on paper looks like success. And of course, if something works, you repeat it. What nobody saw coming was that the system would turn into something they had to use every season just to keep the accounts alive. Because when you record accounting profits 1 year, the next year you have to generate even more, so the balance sheet keeps looking the same. The worse thing got, the bigger those numbers grew in the balance sheets. The more money they need, the more players they exchange. So Juventus kept looking like a profitable club, but the reality was that the debt was growing, and the need to generate more accounting profits was growing too, until someone finally asked why a backup fullback was suddenly worth 18 millions. In 2022, auditors and the public prosecutor opened the internal documents, and at that point there was no escape. According to the investigation, internal conversations mentioned adjusting figures. The bomb could not be diffused anymore. Juventus went from being the dominant club in Italy to a global example of how playing with fire can end up burning the whole institution. Benedict came fast. 15 points deducted, resignations across the board, and a reputation left in pieces. But beneath all that, there was a much more human and much more tragic reason. What the investigation showed was not some global plot to deceive everyone, but a structural problem. They had fallen into a very dangerous cycle. According to the documents, Juventus had been relying on capital gains for years to balance the book. But take those operations away, and the club's accounts suddenly look weak. Very weak. What does that mean? That, according to the reports, the club was using player exchanges with inflated valuations to generate immediate accounting profits. On the paper, millions were coming in, but no real money entered the club. It was a profit that only lived inside Excel. Why did they do it? Because according to the reports, it gave them quick oxygen. You show profit today, calm everyone down, meet requirements, show strength, and you can keep pushing forward. Problem is that the system hooks you. If 1 year you rely on those accounting profits, the next year you have to repeat them, and the next year too. And that's how you keep going until you depend entirely on repeating the move, so the numbers keep looking strong. That's the issue. When a big club depends so heavily on accounting profits, there comes a moment when the pressure builds up. The public photo goes one way, and the internal reality goes another. And when that gap gets too big, it blows. This story isn't about billions or masterminds. It's about a huge club that ended up leaning too much on a system that only works as long as nobody looks too closely. And in the end, in a world where every euro is a proof of life, where numbers rule everything, this, according to analysts, was a ticking time bomb, and sooner or later, it was bound to break. And if all of this felt heavy to you, wait, because it's nothing compared to what happened to Barca in the video just popped up right here. What happened to Juventus was an explosion. What happened to Football Club Barcelona was a 17-year shadow. Payments, debts, an absence of documentation that left even more questions open, and a scandal that still shakes the club reputation today. If you want to dive into the Negreira case in detail, click here. It's literally the video you need to watch after this one.